BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Today, a warning that illegal meat imports are at crisis levels, heightening the risk of foot and mouth and African swine fever.
Here is the perfect storm for what could be a catastrophically bad outcome for British agriculture. And the really scary thing is nobody seems to be prepared to step up to the plate and take control and do something about this.
More on that report from MPs later. Let's start, though, with our focus for this week, farmland birds, the corn buntings, yellowhammers, skylarks and many others which rely on agricultural landscapes in which to live. Since the 1970s, their numbers have been in decline as hedges were ripped out and farming intensified. But over the past few years, many farmers and environmental schemes have worked to reverse that trend. This week, we'll hear what sorts of projects are underway and what impact they're having. But first, to set the scene, I spoke to Alice Groom, Head of Sustainable Land Policy at the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds.
So we know that farmland birds have declined significantly since the 1970s. Government publishes what is called the Farmland Bird Index, and that has declined by 60%. A lot of those declines were in those early years, while birds are still declining. So they've declined by about 10% since 2018. The rate of decline has reduced. So whilst we're still concerned, there are signs that those declines are slowing.
Why? What's the main driver of this?
Back in the 60s and 70s, farming policy paid for farmers to remove a lot of the habitats, so the flower-rich meadows, hedgerows, areas of scrub and even farm ponds. We also had changes in farming practices, so increased use of insecticides and pesticides, but also things like changing from spring sown to autumn sown cropping meant that there weren't these weedy overwinter stubbles, which were a great source of food for farmland birds.
Over the past number of years, though, we have had many different environmental schemes which pay farmers to create habitat for birds and mammals. What kind of an impact are they having?
We have had this great history of agri-environment schemes, particularly in England, that has enabled more habitat to be brought back onto farmland. And there are many farmers who have engaged really positively with those schemes. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing the rate of decline slowing. But we know that it's still not enough. So really up-to-date evidence shows that we need about 50 to 60% of farmers to manage 10% under a mix of wildlife habitat. And if we were able to do that, the research says we could be 90% confident that would lead to a reverse in farmland birds.
You must be concerned then that the sustainable farming incentive is currently closed to applications and that we've spoken to farmers on this programme who can't renew some of the schemes that pay them to do this, the countryside stewardship schemes.
It's vital that government gets this new version of the sustainable farming incentive out. And we think that they have this opportunity now with a new version to introduce a wildlife package that enables farmers to get proper reward for doing that sort of 10% wildlife habitat for nature.
Alice Groom there from the RSPB, and we'll be swooping back to farmland birds throughout the week. Now, more on the growing issue of feed. As we've reported on Farming Today, parched fields in many parts of the country this summer meant farmers using feed really intended for the winter. And where drought hit, there wasn't much grass to make silage or hay in the first place. The countryside charity, the Addington Fund, has announced it's opening its fodder aid grant scheme for farmers who can't afford feed and don't have a financial fallback. Addington Fund Director Sue Edwards told me what they're hearing on the ground.
We've been hearing some quite sad stories, actually. We had one farmer who normally would bale 300 to 350 round bales of silage, and this year he's only had 50 round bales. We had a really sad story of a farmer who took 300 of his best breeding ewes to Melton Mowbray Market. He was hoping that they would go in the breeding sale, but they had to go in the cull because the market was absolutely rammed packed with people doing the same thing. And they just couldn't feed their stock. So they have to do what you have to do when you're running a business, is try and alleviate that by reducing the amount of mouths you have to feed. He couldn't even go to the market, because of the consequences of that.
And we have seen farmers already feeding stock, which means there'll be a knock-on in the autumn, winter, when those animals come in, because there'll be even less to give them.
Absolutely. And then even into next year, if you think of the farmer who sold his breeding ewes, that's 300 sheep that won't be having lambs for him next year. So the impact for him, for his finances next year, will take its toll as well. So it's not just a problem now, it will go on to 2026 as well, we think.
Are you worried about the position many farm businesses will be in come January, February?
So we are worried that come the winter, as dairy farmers are feeding their clamped silage now, what are they going to have to feed their cows when the winter comes, which is going to affect their yields and their milk? You know, we always try and be hopeful at Haddington and try and find something positive, but it is looking quite stark at the moment.
Although I suppose people might say, well, this is difficult, but people have to make difficult business decisions in all sorts of worlds, and farmers will have to do the same. As you say, sell some animals, buy expensive fodder, maybe apply for a grant.
Exactly. We are focusing on those who don't have any options. There's no way that we're going to be able to help every single farmer who comes to us for help. So we are asking that farmers reduce their stock numbers when they can, as hard as that is, but get rid of and sell their store animals now rather than face having to make that decision in the winter when it will be even worse for them. And whether they can go to their bank and look at getting support from their bank. And also, if you do have savings, you know, we would be expecting you to look at that rather than come to a charity for help, because it is a business decision you have to make.
So who is eligible for your grant?
Anybody who are unable to trade, if they haven't got any store animals that they can sell to help mitigate against this situation, and their animals are in threat of becoming an animal welfare issue, then they are eligible, especially if you're closed down with TB or whether you have some animal disease that is affecting your ability to trade. We will be prioritising on those that we feel are most in need.
Sue Edwards from the Addington Fund. MPs are warning that illegal meat imports are at crisis levels, risking a major animal disease outbreak. And they say the authorities tackling this wave of illegal produce find themselves without the necessary leadership, intelligence and resources to do so. The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee claims that alarming amounts of illegal meat and dairy products are coming into Great Britain, but the true scale of the problem is unknown because clear data isn't available. They want the government to do more to tackle the issue. Diseases like African swine fever and foot and mouth can be present in meat and dairy, with potentially devastating consequences for farmers. The Liberal Democrat MP for Shetland and Orkney, Alistair Carmichael, chairs the committee. I asked him what evidence there is of illegal meat imports increasing.
We have seen it with our own eyes. We went down to the port of Dover, and it is a pretty horrific story, let me tell you. The sheer volumes that are coming through the port of Dover in particular, but doubtless also through other ports around the country, at a time when you have foot and mouth disease and African swine fever on continental Europe, creates really what here is the perfect storm for what could be a catastrophically bad outcome for British agriculture. And the really scary thing is nobody seems to be prepared to step up to the plate and take control and do something about this.
We have covered here on Farming Today some of the concerns of port staff. We also reported on some of the evidence you heard and what you found on your visit. Were you surprised by what you saw?
We were obviously going to see what was happening in Dover for a reason, so we weren't going completely cold. We saw white vans of different sizes being opened up. We saw pretty roughly butchered meat, some of which was coming for the food supply market, others of which would have been perhaps headed to specific communities. One of the real frustrations of this work has been the difficulty actually in quantifying the scale of what we are dealing with here. We know that it's big because we hear that from people like the Dover Port Health Authority and indeed from their colleagues in Border Force. But because there is no strategic approach to this, we know it's bad, we just don't know how bad.
Well, that's the point here, isn't it? There isn't any good data available. You say illegal meat imports are increasing, but how do you know that they're at the crisis levels you describe without reliable data?
Well, we rely on what we hear from the people who are doing whatever work is being done there. And, I keep coming back to Dover Port Health Authority because that was the visit that we did. The extent to which the people who are charged with this front line of the nation's biosecurity, the circumstances in which they are being expected to work are truly disgraceful.
DEFRA says intelligence-led checks are being carried out. It talks about robust biosecurity controls which were implemented at pace following confirmation of the foot and mouth outbreak in Germany. Why are you not convinced by those reassurances?
Well, we've looked at what they call intelligence-led, and I'm afraid the conclusion that we have come to is that that intelligence is incomplete. There are too many players on the field here with nobody taking responsibility. DEFRA, as the department which is responsible for the biosecurity of this country, should be the people to hold the ring, and they should be the people to set up a task force, we say, call it what you will, bring everybody together, get systematic analysis of what's coming in and where and in what quantity, and then move to stop it. You get a lot of confiscation, but where you see evidence of large-scale imports, there really ought to be more than confiscation. There needs to be prosecution. That's going to be the only thing, I think, that will turn this around.
The chair of the Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, Alistair Carmichael. We asked DEFRA for an interview, but no one was available. It told us, this government has significantly increased seizures of illegal meat, restricted the import of dangerous animal products, and is investing over £200 million in a new National Biosecurity Centre. They continue, we will consider the recommendations of the committee as we continue to work closely with port operators, industry, trade partners and border force to protect our food security, farmers and economy. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer was Sarah Swadling, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production. Now over to the BBC Weather Centre for the Farming Today 5-day forecast.